Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to This Way Out. It's been a while. This is going to be my first episode in quite a while, and I'm going to be having a conversation with a friend of mine, David Bennett. I'm going to preface this episode with this little message because I feel like we're going to be covering some conversations, some topic points that might be considered, I don't know, controversial, poignant, tumultuous, considering the current climate that exists in the country, right? I know that I said when I started this project that I did not want to make this project about politics, and I don't necessarily believe that we're doing that in this episode. The thing that I definitely want to put out there are, in the topics that we discuss, we come up short of getting into really a whole lot of details, and some of that has to do because we don't have necessarily all the information, and we can't necessarily speak to every topic intelligently. All we can do is provide our point of view, which is something that we mentioned quite a bit in the episode. Really, the main point that I want to put out there as a goal for this one interview is that people with differing opinions can have conversations. Amicable, mature discussions over the various topics that exist in the country and the world today. And, people who with differing opinions don't have to see eye to eye on everything. And there's a way to navigate those conversations. And I'm hoping that in this interview, we're able to demonstrate that well enough that it can maybe provide some assistance for people who watch it later. Okay, so just some points definitely is that there's a little bit of political discussion. Not much. Not much. I try very hard not to make this a political project or a project based on political ideals or ideologies and stuff like that. Try to make it as neutral as possible. But we do go into some stuff. We come up short in a few areas, and some of that is by design. Some of that is due to because we don't really have all the information to be able to discuss in any depth certain points of view and stuff like that. So I just put that out there just so with the viewer, keep that awareness, keep that in the back of your mind as you watch the episode. But I'm very grateful that you tuned in this one go around, and I hope that you enjoy the episode and that you consider subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing, all that stuff, that comes at the end. So thank you very much. Here's the episode. My name is Miguel Mata, first generation American, retired military veteran, and now full-time college student. In my lifetime, I've come to meet people from all walks of life, every corner of the country and most parts of the world. What I can tell you is, everyone has a story. On this channel, I plan to share those stories with you and prove that despite the differences that make each of us who we are as individuals, fundamentally, we are all the same. I believe that by telling these stories, I'll actually reveal we are all connected by the common thread of overcoming adversity, caring for our loved ones, and helping our communities. And that by doing this, I can shed some light on what many of us believe to be a very dark world. And now, to shed more light. This Way Out. Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to This Way Out. It's been a while. We've all been busy. I've got school. My guest today, Mr. David Bennett, he's got school. We've got lives. Things are going on. But luckily, my friend David Bennett here was kind enough to sit down with me so we could record another episode. He and I had a conversation not too long ago, and I'd like to explore that a little bit on this platform. But before we do that, before we get there, I want to give my guest, David, a chance to introduce himself. So I've already introduced him. David Mr. David Bennett. David, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Yeah, no problem.
So where are you at right now?
So I am in my my hometown of Vancouver, Washington. It's about 20 minutes from Portland. So up in the northwest.
Yeah.
I remember being a kid and having to explain to people that I was not from Canada and I was not from the nation's capital. So get some.
But you grew up there in Vancouver?
Yep, I grew up in Vancouver. So I was born in Albuquerque actually, and then 6 months later, parents got out of the service, zipped up to Vancouver. Spent my 18 years prior to the Air Force here. Did your typical, I mean, it's not a small town, did your typical high school stuff, child rearing, and joined the Air Force after 11-year-old me got to watch 9/11 and said, I'm going to do something about that. And joined the Air Force, went in as explosive ordnance disposal. I did about a third of the way into that, failed out. That's neither here nor there. Probably for the best. Got reclassified as aircraft electrical and environmental. Needs the service come first. Yep. So they told me what to do in that one. It turned out to be pretty good. Learned how to turn a wrench. Learned how to read wiring schematics. It was a good experience. Got to meet. That's where we met up. Is in Albuquerque. That was first duty station after tech school. Spent some time there. Went to Travis, and then got medically retired on some knee injuries. So I got medically separated, not retired.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you had to get medically separated.
Yeah.
Because, I really think, honestly, truly and honestly, the time that we spent together in Kirtland there in Albuquerque, I thought you had tons of potential. And from the military standpoint, from the Air Force standpoint, tons of potential. It looked like you had a bright future ahead of you. Unfortunately, it wouldn't work out that way. But I'd say, the life didn't end there when you separated from the military. What did you go on to do?
So I got out, came back home. Home being Vancouver, Washington, and went back to school. Originally wanted to go in for civil engineering. I took one class in civil engineering and decided I did not like the company of engineers. And luckily, I got hooked into a introductory chemistry course and fell in love with the topic. And now I'm going into my third year of chemistry work, and I work in a physics lab currently. We're working on synthesizing high-temperature superconductors and trying to maneuver myself into a graduate program over at Iowa State University. So we'll see how that one goes. Yeah, then the goal is to get into like R&D and materials engineering. Ideally, it'd be nice to get a room temperature superconductor, but that's kind of everybody's goal. So it's just another rat in the rat race at that point of getting to that point. But as long as you can, I get a lot of fulfillment on doing research and stuff like that. So I kind of harkens back to our CV22 days when you do a lot of spinning your wheels and not a lot of progress. But eventually you figure out what's wrong, and it's that epiphany of that hit of dopamine that keeps you going. Right.
For those not of the military background or of the Air Force background, CV-22 was the airframe that we worked. The CV-22 Osprey tilt rotor aircraft. And yes, there was in those days quite a bit of spinning tires and frustration with engineering.
Yeah.
But that's cool though, man. I mean, that's really, really neat. Did you I'm just out of curiosity, did you have like an interest in that? Did you, like when you were a kid in high school and that sort of stuff, did you have was science a strong point for you?
I failed my 2 physics classes in high school. I didn't like school in high school for the most part. So after the fact, kind of trying to pursue why I have difficulty, like I get lost reading a lot of times. So I'll read along and I'll read the same paragraph over and over and over and over because I can't pay attention long enough to get through the paragraph to get it downloaded into my brain. So I finally got tired of it, and I went and I talked to my doctor about it, and roundabout got back to a psychologist or somebody like that. He said that he he said that he doesn't think I have ADD, but he gave me the medication that they give for people for ADD, and it's like a night and day difference. Like I can read books now, I can remember stuff.
Right.
So my ability to comprehend and apply information is off the chart compared to where I was. But no, like I really didn't have a. I mean, I've always been interested in like physics and stuff like that because I've always liked the idea of trebuchets and stuff when I was a kid. So that you go through and have all the ballistics and stuff like that, and like how heavy and how far can I throw this thing,
Right.
and that all boils down to knowing the right math and physics and stuff like that.
So as far as like the material and the subject matter and the just the overall your overall feeling about the path that you're on does it feel pretty good? How are you feeling about that? Are you excited?
I really excited. So it's definitely been a journey. You have to sit there and say, well, I have to go into this field. I don't know what sort of job I'm going to do with this thing. Like there's a bunch of like university jobs, and it's a relatively competitive field, to be completely honest. So that's something that I have to worry about down the road. But every time I try to wiggle off that path, it's like, nope, this one, go down this, stop, go this way. So that's it's been good, man. I mean, it's just a bunch of doors open. I know that what I've been actually really fortunate to get into a program at Portland State University called Build Exodo. It's a NIH, so National Institute of Health, has sponsored this program to take a bunch of minority students, so first generation people of color, different orientations, stuff like that, and they basically put them into a lab. They put them into a research environment for like a year and a half, and it culminates over a summer. And they at the end you do a scientific presentation. I just got done with mine. So yeah, that's been.
How do you think you did? Was it for a grade or was there?
Oh no, feedback? No. This is all just it's showing the main goal of Exodo. The best way that I can surmise it, and I don't know the technicalities behind it as far as what the NIH is looking for, but we do like CVs, Certa Veritas or something like that basically breaks down all your scientific research, teach you how to write those things, teach you how to write scientific grants, things like that. Just kind of fill in that gap between people who've never been in this situation versus people who get to people that have come from like those lines and have access to those things. It's basically just giving people, it's opening a door for people to walk in and for them to put in the grit to get into those fields.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
get you in a way kind of a little bit of OJT, eh?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's taken in and being like, okay, how do we identify our research topic? How do we research those things, and then how do we design an experiment to prove what we're going to do, like outside of like a high school thing? Like, well, what happens when you put vinegar and baking soda together? No, it's a little more complicated than that.
The main reason why I wanted to invite you onto this, onto my platform, onto this project, was because of a conversation that you opened up with me like a month or so ago. And, going down this path to have this conversation kind of goes against, in a way, a little bit, my intent for starting this project, which was, or not necessarily the intent, but one of the rules that the rules I had set for myself, which is I didn't really want to talk politics, right? Yeah. I think if we had to be honest, we're not necessarily talking politics here. We're not talking politics.
I agree. I don't think it's political.
I don't think we're necessarily talking politics, but but if it goes that way, then it goes that way. We'll navigate that however it works out. But you opened up a conversation to me not too long ago about identity, right?
Yep.
Your identity. I don't know if you remember a roundabout way what you asked, but if you wouldn't mind, would you mind sharing that thought that you had?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just lead off with just just to set the stage, is that the First Amendment's really important to me. Just because I don't share the same viewpoint doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge and can accept someone else's viewpoint at the same time. I think especially with the kind of the catalyst or the powder keg of the aftermath of George Floyd's death, it kind of threw gasoline on this whole fire of oppressors and things like that, and how I don't know if you want to lump systematic racism in there or whatnot, but then you start. It opens the conversation for all of the quote-unquote social justice talking points.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So one of those things is that more often than not, me being about 30 years old, being a Caucasian white male who lives in a single-family home, like I'm pretty much the boilerplate for what people consider white privilege and that oppressor class.
Right.
But I'd like to think that us having a civil dialogue here, as two men, two human beings that don't agree on everything, is kind of contrary to that idea. Like I hope that you know me well enough that I would go out of my way to make sure that someone, no matter of what they looked like or what they thought, especially if they thought other than me, I would definitely give them a platform to speak what they thought.
I truly believe that. I truly believe that. And as a matter of fact, I think it should also be said that, since we're setting the stage, I don't think anybody who watches this, right, they have to understand that your viewpoints, your perspective, and your opinions are yours alone. You can't be expected to represent a group of people, honestly. Yeah. And you can't be expected to represent an ideology or anything like that. So that being said, for anybody who's watching, David and I have worked together on charity functions. He supported my family. I have kids with special needs. He has a brother with special needs. We come from families who have autistic family members, and we've supported each other in that respect. So I respect where you come from and your perspective on pretty much on any matter. Although we may not necessarily agree 100% on everything, I think it's an important point to make, that especially in today's climate, that it's important that people understand that it's not necessity to be on the same page on everything. It's okay to be on separate pages, but we can still get along. We can still be good people to each other,
Yeah. And I full-heartedly believe that. And and some of the experiences that I've had that have led me to feel so defensive on this sort of like terms like white privilege or like oppressor or stuff like that was kind of a bad experience that I had going into university. They had us in a bunch of they put us in a big room and they started listing off different categories basically to list yourself in. So they asked you about your orientation, like whether or not you were heterosexual, homosexual, asexual, and then there's like a preferred group and a slightly oppressed group and then fully oppressed group, whether or not you're able-bodied or slightly disabled or fully disabled, white, Latino, Jewish, there's kind of all those different categories, and it's like lined up, boom, 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 down the line. Like you're the privileged boogeyman of why everything's wrong in society. And I was like, this isn't. You can't. You can't. You can put a cover on a book, but you can't tell me the contents of it by looking at it.
Right.
Like I'm not. I'm certainly not a bigoted person. Like I'm sympathetic to discrimination, and I'm sympathetic to I've heard Ben Shapiro say it a bunch of times. Like, if you can show me someone being racist and discriminating someone, show me that person and let's go take care of them together.
Right. Yeah.
It's just one of those things. Like I'm so fatigued and so tired of having to be associated with this.
It's a stigma.
Yeah, stigma. That's what it is. I mean, and it's to be fair, like you could argue that that's what they're trying to address with other groups. And I think what we've talked about this, I know, and other things, is that I full-heartedly believe that you don't get to pick where you start in life, and you don't get to pick the cards that you're dealt.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing. I full-heartedly believe that if you put your heart and soul into something, you can get to where you want to get to go.
Right.
And I think that there are genuinely are practices that were put in place at some times that we still feel the echoes and the scars of, that need to get addressed. But that at the same time, like, I feel like we've gone leaps and bounds from where those things were accurately set up to where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man.
Yeah. So I agree with you. And I think the part that really grasped my attention with when you opened up this conversation with me a while back is that, these are feelings that you're experiencing. These are your thoughts. And I thought to myself, this is a friend of mine. And I know him to be a genuinely good person. Right. And for you to have these feelings of, asking yourself these questions. How do you shed this identity? How do you alter this identity?
Yeah.
Or whatever, right? Shed this oppressor, quote unquote, oppressor identity. For you to have those feelings and for you to have those conscious thoughts, it got my attention because I'm thinking to myself, there really is the current climate really is impacting, kind of sort of in a roundabout way, to quote the president, good people on both sides. Now, when he used that quote, I don't necessarily think it was not a well-placed, it was not a well-placed comment.
I will never applaud our president on his ability to use tact.
But
that's a conversation for another time.
Right. In its, I think in its truest form of the statement in today's climate, there really are, when you talk about the quote unquote oppressor oppressed, the racial tensions that appear to be increasing, there really are good people on both sides that are being impacted, not just actually, but emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and to me, that just for you to send that message to me and open that conversation to me, that was evidence to me that good people, yourself and others, are experiencing some, once again, in your words, I guess, some mental fatigue with regard to like racial tensions. There are things that exist. There are quote unquote systematic things exist. There are environments that exist where people of, especially people of color, especially Black people, they don't get the same starting point, like you said. But I tend to agree with you that with the proper support, anything is possible for anyone. Where it kind of gets grayed out a little bit, though, and this is myself talking from the way I look at it, and I think you would agree. Where it kind of gets grayed out is that, it's like this whole issue and this whole thing as a whole is very complex, and there are no pretty little boxes that you can put a fix, right? A fix on. You can't say, well, if so and so and so and so did this, then, right? Or if blah 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 blah, then. I'll give you an example. So what gets thrown around a lot is, well, if you worked a little harder, blah 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 blah, right?
Oh, yeah.
And to that, I respond with, well, I could take you to quite a few projects that exist right here in Charleston, and we can knock door to door to every one of these households, and we can say that very same statement to every one of these people that are running their homes, running their houses, And I would almost guarantee you that, you know, arguments and firearms aside, right?
Yeah.
Most of these people are working their pants off, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that response, the working, if you worked harder, blah blah blah, it's not a blanket fix all, you know. And
No.
for you, I think you understand that as an intellectual, but I would say that there are a lot of people out there who don't necessarily understand, either whether they don't understand due to ignorance or they don't understand due to negligence. They don't understand just how complex these, you know, situations are.
Yeah. So I actually, it was a huge. I didn't particularly agree with everything that I heard in the class, which is how you should approach most things. But I took a criminology class and it really opened my eyes to the opportunities that people have in, like the projects. It was about Compton and other things, and it's like I never even considered it I always considered if you had to sell drugs, that was something that you chose to do. But I put myself in that situation. Like if I didn't have a job, if I was working some minimum wage job and I couldn't put food on the family, and I had the opportunity to either A, starve, or B, go sell crystal meth, like to feed my kids and my family and to keep a roof over my head, like you bet my butt I'll be out there Walter White and that stuff.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of it is there's a lot of ignorance that gets played into it.
Right.
I think that it's like you said, like it's a big knotted mess. Like you pull out one knot that makes three more.
Right.
And I think that people more often than not want to take the easy route of saying, well, we're just not going to deal with the knot. We're just going to deal with that big ball of knots, and like that's fine. We'll just deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's not equitable. I mean, that's not what our country's made of.
Right.
I'm a big proponent that if you put enough jobs into the economy and you let people, just from my point of view, if you give people opportunity to excel, they will.
Right.
I think that there definitely needs to be some sort of government interaction in that whole thing. But I also think that as long as you foster an environment that allows people to be employed, gainfully employed,
Right.
That people will prosper. Like the people who are working their tail off will get into those jobs that will
Right.
make it so that they don't have to do things
Right.
that
And
they wouldn't necessarily agree with.
In fairness, you know, and once again, you know, I talk about like support systems and stuff like that. You know, support systems. We're talking about family, community, that sort of stuff. You know, they don't necessarily exist in prominence in a lot of in every corner of America, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another gray area that exists, where that's another gray area that exists, that if someone tries to throw out one of those wet noodle responses and hope it sticks on the wall, it doesn't apply. That's probably a terrible analogy, but it's you know what I mean? It's just there's no clear-cut fix or no clear-cut response that applies to every situation or this entire situation. What it requires is kind of like what you're doing, what you and I are doing right now, requires conversation. It requires conversation. And, you know, if I could be, you know, but to go back to my point when I talk about like support systems, you know, I can only speak to my family. In my family, there was a big focus on investing in the next generation. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Like you invest in the next generation and then push them in a direction and guide them and quite literally push, like almost physically, you know, physically abuse people.
Gotcha.
That's a little extreme, and I am exaggerating a little bit, but you know, I mean, there's a genuine, and there's and not to say that there isn't in all families and in all circles, but I tend to believe that maybe there might not be enough focus on, or maybe there might not be enough priority on investing in future generations. And specifically what I'm talking about is the mentality that I think exists in this country especially, which is the immediate gratification mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
me have to have it, whatever it is, now, and I am the priority. And I really think that and this is where this kind of this platform comes into play, where, if we kind of invested in each other, and if we especially invested in the next generation, we would probably see a lot of steps in a direction that we can all be proud of. You know what I mean? But once again, there are a lot of gray areas in that explanation. There's a lot of gray areas in that idea. But to put a long bow on it, I tend to believe that there's not enough focus on investing in the next generation, and not enough support systems in place either, to ensure that those next generations are taking the next step in a positive direction.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think I had a conversation with my mother-in-law about this earlier too. I think the world would, our country would benefit a lot if we all had a common ground to come from. I think one of the reasons that the Air Force and military branches in general has the camaraderie it has is that everyone goes through basic training or OTS. Everyone has that common period of time in their life where they were all equal at some point or another time. Whether or not you came from you had a trust fund or $100 million in the bank, or you came in with the 50 cents in your pocket, like you were all equally worthless as soon as as soon as you line up behind those yellow dots or put your feet on the yellow footprints, like you're all equal in that point in time. And then you can all harken back to that point in time where you all can say that I went through the same experience. And I think it's hard. I think it's hard to invest in kids when, especially if you're a single mom, you have 3 kids, you got to work 2 jobs. Like I don't blame them. You can say that, oh well, if I was in that position, I'd always go after my kids. Like, okay, go work 7 16-hour shifts in a week, and make sure your kids have food and all that other stuff, and then sit down and do their homework and keep the house and all that other stuff that's statistically proven to make sure that children grow up.
Yeah. I'm kind of referring to, like, back home where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be this community center that was open, and all of us kids used to hang out there. We didn't have anything better to do, right?
Yeah.
Little, it wasn't necessarily podunk, but little town, West Texas town. And for the most part, all the boys, especially because it was a boys club, but the boys went there, and it was our way of staying out of trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, that community center closed a long time ago. And since it may not be the one reason, but I definitely consider it a reason that our hometown back home has really gone to crap. I tend to believe that if we invested in stuff like that, where we would keep community centers open and running, and keep kids occupied, off the street, out of the exposure of the other criminal element that exists, or bad influence. Let's say it just that way, bad influence, because it doesn't necessarily have to be the criminal element. But if we kept our kids off the streets and not exposed to the bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
Then maybe there might be some hope for the future in that respect. But it's one idea.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that, I kind of can compare myself to my wife comes from a really small town in Winslow, Arizona, and they have a really small group of kids. Like she can name everybody that was in her graduating class. I came from a graduating class of almost 1,000 kids. I knew maybe a fraction of them.
Right.
Like, I think the high school I graduated from was the 3rd largest in the state, and like it's so easy to become a number in the public education system when you get into numbers that big.
Yeah.
I think that there's a huge lack of positive role models. I mean, and I think that you could go a long way by investing into the public education system, and being able to make sure that they can run those after school things,
right?
And that they do have a core of teachers or volunteers or whatnot that go through and make sure that those things are there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another slippery slope that you can go down to, whether or not what should be taught in public school or not. But I think
Right.
the big thing is that you need to have those programs in that place for your. You need to be like it's. I've heard you talk about this on your show multiple times. Is having your tribe, your people. The kids need to be able to know that they have people in their lives.
And I always come back to, I hope it's understood. I understand that there are a ton of gray areas. People are trying real hard. And I remember having a conversation with someone, as a matter of fact, not too long ago, and his words are popping into my head when he talked about, cautioning people. This guy, his name is CW. I think he's going to be on my show soon. Black gentleman who grew up. He was the product of desegregation, and talked about. He's the guy's fantastic. Retired chief master sergeant, and but he talked about cautioning the idea that the assumption that Black people especially come from broken homes, right?
Yep.
He's like the family unit just works differently, right? So I definitely operate with that understanding. What I'm speaking to is once again is the gray are those gray areas that people aren't and maybe it's not necessarily gray areas. You can talk about you can say the reality that exists that can't be that the realities that exist that take away from the validity of a statement that of something like you got to work harder, that sort of stuff. You just got to work.
It never
harder.
occurred to anybody.
Yeah,
like that's a new and novel concept.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to speak in political terms here. But generally speaking, and as I understand it, the university environment, the higher education environment, universities, colleges, etc., heavy liberal type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And the thinking that comes along with that. It's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad because I don't consider myself as having a political affiliation, but I'm just saying that there are let me say it this way. There are attitudes that exist on these campuses that are grounded in politics, and I'm just going to say liberal politics. That can be pretty harsh, man. Like these kids who don't know any better, they stand their ground on stuff they don't know what they're talking about, and they can get pretty ugly. I think I know the answer to this question, but have you experienced any kind of like quote unquote abuse or have had any awkward conversations or ill conversations? Just because, like you said, you're the demographic of people who are the quote unquote oppressor.
No.
Oh, good.
But I know that you know this of me. I'm a very quiet and reserved individual. I subscribe fully to the Teddy Roosevelt quote of "Speak softly and carry a big stick." So, and the other thing that you need to remember is Portland's kind of a monoculture for this liberal, and there's a lot of openly socialist and communist proving people. And they are very vocal and very proud about it. So you have PSU, you have Lewis and Clark, you have all those kind of Reed College, all those places are kind of this stronghold and this hotbed for this social justice or liberal attitude. But at the same time, like I can definitely see that it's happened recently. People being attacked for having certain political affiliations or believing what they believe.
You witnessed this?
I've seen video evidence of it from both sides of the line. I try to stay away from those things as far as often because I know that it's not a good place for me to be operating in.
But this is on your campus?
On campus or just in Portland in general. So I mean, if you wanted to back it back down into university level, the only time that I have been quote unquote received any sort of like you're a bad person type, and even if that was a mild and it was not their intention at all. I want to preface it with that is just the way that I took away from the scenario. is that one time during the kind of induction type, you establish pronouns, which is neither here nor there. It's one of those things that it's another one of those things like, well, if I show up and I don't say that I am, if I want to establish myself as a heterosexual white male with the pronouns he, his, him, what I'm basically saying that here I am. I'm the boogeyman, or at least that's how I feel about going to it. Whether that's their intention or not, that's my perception of the situation.
Right.
Of when I'm being asked for those things.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, like there's not any malice behind it. And it genuinely, they're trying to include people, because I know that there genuinely are people who are very confused on who they are as a person, and it makes a lot more sense if they just say like, I don't know what my pronouns are, man. And like, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But at the same time, like if I don't want to hand out my pronouns at the beginning of a class, like don't make me feel bad about it.
Right. Right. You know, I can understand how. Yeah, like, and I'm just speaking personally, like the whole pronoun thing, like we have that going on over here too, and I just don't think about it. I don't give it a second thought.
I've gotten to the point where it doesn't bug me either. Like I just expect it to be there, and 9 times out of 10, it's not mandatory. And if it always takes all of my willpower not to put down Flying Spaghetti Monster or something ridiculous. Because I know that it's important to someone else.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's one of those things like you put people in front of yourself. I think that's lost a lot of things, is that you can show empathy to someone, you can show someone kindness without showing weakness. Like me holding the door open for you doesn't mean that I think you're lesser. It means that I want to be nice and hold the door open for you. Like don't read too much into it. Like like, if I want to offer to buy you lunch, that doesn't mean that I don't think you can provide for yourself. Right. Let me provide. It's that whole adage, like give me the opportunity to bless you.
Yeah.
Like let me do that for you.
You're using those examples makes me curious, like where that thinking comes from. Like, have you had that experience personally, where if you hold the door open for somebody, like you get an attitude if you try to buy it?
Well, I will hold the door open for me, even if you look at me like I burnt your house down. That's just who I am as a person.
Right.
I definitely have caught some slack, and I've never had someone cuss me out for holding the door open for them. There are certainly been certain cases where I've not directly been exposed to those type of things, but I know that there have been vocal people who have made it apparent that those type of situations make them uncomfortable. Not necessarily, it's just kind of passing by, and like I'm an observant person, and so I notice these things. But again, like a lot of this, honestly, sometimes
dude, I think that you're articulating something that a lot of people have issue with, which is that of perception and expectation. You know, if somebody perceives something to be a certain way, you know, perceives an interaction to be X, Y, or Z, you know, that's what you're thinking. But it may not necessarily be the truth. Not to take anything away from what you said, but I don't think you're the only person who experiences that. And I'm talking to this from the point of view of, like, once again, we're talking about like the current climate, right? And the divisiveness that seems to exist in this climate, and the polarity that seems to exist. I'm kind of a moron when it comes to this stuff, and I really do kind of just stay on autopilot most of the day. And I'm a bit oblivious to that stuff. If nothing was said, then if you have the door opening thing, and you believe that, you perceive that in that awkward side eye thing, that you perceive that to connect the dot with, you are the dominant person, whatever it is that you explained just now, like you, whatever I mean, like it might not have been that at all. It might have been,
I guess it
gal might have just been checking you out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, or they're just having a bad day, and they're like, "Oh, well, this guy opened the door for me. Whatever, get out of my way." Like I have 15 finals that I have to take today. Like I don't have time for you to say thank you. Get out of my way.
But then again, open the door fine. But who knows? You know?
And it doesn't really matter. I mean, I've
exactly.
Again, like you get to the point where I'm on autopilot. Like I'm going to live the way that I want to go, that I can go to bed and be proud of who I was that day. But yeah, like I mean, even having this conversation, you kind of opened my eyes. Like, well, have you witnessed that? And I think about it, and like, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that like I perceive that's going on around me, and a lot of like the Chicken Little Sky is following stuff that I let go through my head and be like, you know what? Like, I've never been rounded up. I mean, just because I've seen, and so often, like we get to see the polar extremes of either side of that coin.
Right.
And I think that the majority of us operate in that gray area between those two.
Right.
And I think that it takes conversations like the ones we're having right here to say, there's maybe 2 or 3 sticking points between us that we'd say, well, I have to agree to disagree on that one.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like we're not incompatible.
Right.
And I think a lot of the stuff that we're seeing today, especially up in my neck of the woods, is you see people on that extreme part of the thing, and I think that there's just a larger population where I live. Unfortunately, there's a large population of the other group too that just doesn't. They're oil and water.
Yeah, and that's where that is a tricky mess, man. That's unfortunately a tricky mess. But I want to add this one thing also to that perception thing is that I'm glad that you kind of see it or understood my explanation behind that and it kind of resonated with you. But for anybody who's watching this, that perspective thing applies to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And let's I'll bring it to the racial tension issue, right? I can't discount or discredit anyone who experiences racial discrimination, racism, outright racism, has evidence of systematic racism. I think we all we all agree that all those things exist in some form and in some fashion. This is kind of a tricky thing too, because the subtlety of racism is also tricky. It's very tricky. There's some subtlety of that's in there, but the only power that we have to respond, or the only power, or not the only power, but the real power or the big power that we have is to respond when it shows its ugly face. Then we respond, and I think that's what you're talking about too. It's like, you show me a racist or you show me racism and we'll tackle it together. And I think the majority of the country exists in that space where it's like, if you show me some wrongdoing and you put racism in that category of wrongdoing, then you will have a squad of allies that will help make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But it's the subtleties and once again, going back to the gray areas that exist in that subject that are so hard to it's so hard to conceptualize. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
For people who have never experienced it before. My go-to, I'm not going to share that story, but the point is that I think to go all the way back to why we're sitting here right now, I think the conversation between you and I is a good example of how we move forward as a country and as a people. We just sit and we talk.
And I think that so much as sitting and talking is, now we're having more or less a face-to-face conversation. I mean, Obviously we're not in a position where even if we were in the same, we can't sit down. I'm in Washington, you're in South Carolina. Like there's no way that we're going to be able to have a sit down 6 feet apart with masks on or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think too many people's meaningful interaction with people that instead of bumping into somebody at the marketplace or, sitting down and having dinner and overhearing something, being like, well, I disagree with that, or having like a forum, like a town hall or something like that. Like all this stuff is online. Like I could sit here and call you every name under the sun. Like you can't do anything physical to me, or we can't have a conversation. And I'm not saying that a disagreement should devolve into physical violence. But so much of it is I can put whatever profile picture I want up on Facebook and call you every name underneath the sun, call you stupid, and I never have to respond to that.
Right.
I think that a lot of the miscommunication can be attributed to people's poor use of ambiguity Yeah, a lot of it is that you can go screech into the ether at anybody who will listen.
Right.
And at the same time, you can go off and be playing Call of Duty for the next 3 days and not even look at this person. He's wrote a whole essay out of why you're an idiot, and he goes screeching into the ether there. And then somebody like us, like, oh well, this is how people talk to each other. And so you get down to the point that people just yell at each other in the streets. I think that there's a lot of ethics and a lot of just how people talk and be civil to each other. Be like, we can sit down, we have a conversation about hot topic issues without it devolving into you're a Nazi or you're a communist.
That a different group that I belong to, somebody asked like, kind of like, how did we end up where we are? And I was like, Facebook.
Yeah, man.
We put too much stock in this Facebook stuff, right? It used to be a place where where we could keep in touch with each other and it was fun and whatever. But it's taken this ugly form and forum that, and we've invested too much stock into emotional stock into how we feel about what we see and read on Facebook. And it's really essentially why I started this project in the first place too. There's a lot of parts of this project, but a big one was one day I'm looking at Facebook and I got the feeling that the world is falling apart, and I have the conscious thought in my head is like, wait a minute, I know this guy and I know this girl and I know this guy and they're all cool people, and we get along really well. I got to prove it. I got to prove that to more people that the world's not falling apart. And Facebook isn't the end all be all of, it's social networking, but it's just not the real world. It's not the real world. We can't make it the real world.
It's the interactions that we have between people that you don't get in Facebook. You get one sort of canned community in Facebook, and you have a little bits of variation of how stuff rolls and stuff like that. But eventually I have not witnessed a Facebook community that has not devolved into a toxic toilet bowl of conversation and name calling.
Yeah.
I mean, it only takes one person who doesn't care. It only takes the Joker to show up in one Facebook community.
Right?
Yeah, it only takes that one guy to completely ruin a space for you.
Right.
Takes that and it takes Facebook, and it just, and then it allows you to cut empathy out of the corner. Like it allows me to call you every name, something that I can call you a name and it can get under your skin and I can watch you get physically upset enough that it, and people just say, oh, no, that's fine. I have to deal with that. I had a great conversation with my son the other day. He was playing with another kid, and he ran up and they both tripped. They fell and they got road rash, and he was really upset that he had hurt this person. Wow. Truly disturbed that he had caused this person harm. And I had to explain to him that you never have to apologize for having empathy. Like, you need to hold on to that. Do not relish in hurting someone or something. But more often, like, people do not put the stock. People don't have the sensitivity to know that those actions have consequences.
Right.
And you see people that have had to deal with violence in their life a lot of the time. Like, so yeah, I don't know where we spun off from that one, but I do think that people have been desensitized to the consequences of their actions. It is just like how your chief friend was talking about. Like, family units operate differently. I mean, I live between. I have a very hardworking, respectable Hispanic family over the side of me. I have another hardworking Arabic family right instead of me. Their families, my family, all three of us work completely different than each other. Like, completely different. Like, it's a night and day difference between those three different demographics. I would happily, like, you knock on my door at 3:00 in the morning. Let's go fix whatever needs to get fixed.
Right.
We're different, but that doesn't mean that we don't share enough commonality in order to coexist. I mean, to love each other.
So yeah, it warms my heart to hear you say that. And once again, the current, the tensions being what they are, I really hope that anybody who might see this in the future, and maybe nobody will, but I always believe that somebody will eventually. I hope they see that and they hear and they understand that we're all just people here. You and I are just demonstrating, what it means to be two different people having a conversation who can agree on some things and disagree on others. Although I think this time we mostly agreed, and that was cool. But who can come from two different places and have two different lives and two different experiences, et cetera, and just come from two totally different perspectives on various issues, and we can talk through them and be hunky dory.
I think the biggest thing that I think that we've kind of been dancing around is that it's okay to be wrong. Like, it's okay to say, hey, I've been given substantial information and I've changed my mind on this point of view.
Yeah,
and that doesn't make you weak either. So
do you think you said that twice? Do you think that's a relatively pertinent issue, like weakness?
I think I can only speak from how I perceive, again back to perception, how
Right.
I perceive how other men kind of present themselves against other
Yeah.
people. Even when you have even especially right now, if I can go scroll through your Facebook tweet on everything that especially you've been vocal on your political or whatever social agenda. Like if I can go back and I can categorize and write an essay on every single point that you've ever made, like what you said in 2012, like that's almost 10 years of life experience. Like it's not unreasonable to think that your mind has changed on this subject, or that what you said in 2012 might have been more relevant in that context than it is in 2020. I think that that does play a huge part. Is that it's okay to put yourself in a place where you're vulnerable and say, hey, like I don't know, like it's okay to say that I'm ignorant on this stuff.
You're right.
Like I remember we had this conversation. Like I have really struggled with the process of thought process of what white privilege is, just because like I'm not used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I come from a place where you work hard and that you earn the things that you get.
Right.
I think there are certain situations where like my interactions in some cases like are different than other people's. Like the one concession that I have for white privilege is probably police interaction, and then that's only with like a handful of police officers in my situation. Like I think that there's always going to be good cops and there's always going to be bad cops, and I think that those bad cops unfortunately get to interact people with an unprofessional manner, and I think that we should suss those cops out. And I don't think that they should be allowed to enforce laws. Again, that's my perception. I'm like, I don't know what it's like to wake up and put a badge and a gun on and be like, okay, might not say it tonight, honey. Later.
Yeah, the white privilege thing, it's tough to articulate and really put into words, right? And most of it is feeling, some of it's intuition, that sort of stuff. And it's definitely not black and white. I guess it kind of is, but either way, it's not. But either way, I understand where you're coming from, and thinking about your perspective, where you come from, and your background, stuff like that. I can understand how it would be difficult to understand or fathom, but it's not really something that I'd be comfortable talking about, right now, or whatever, like you and I can talk about different stuff off. Well, I don't want to seem like cowardly, by avoiding this thing. But it goes back to the gray area that I was that kind of alluded to.
I don't know how this social contract exists. The point is that people need to be willing to say, I don't know enough about a topic in order to have an informed enough opinion to tell you one way or the other.
Right.
I think so much of our emphasis, especially, I would argue within the United States, is like you need to have an answer for something. Someone asks you a question, like you need to have an opinion on it. And I think it takes a strong enough person to say...
That's a good point. Yeah.
It takes a strong enough person to say, I don't know, man.
I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And like, please tell me what you think. I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah.
And I think that too many times people get caught up in the I need to change your mind versus like, let me present you some information and I will let you be
Yeah.
an autonomous human being
Yeah.
and decide what you want to think.
Yeah. I think you made a very, very valid point there. Everything is like go or no go. Once again, black or white, yes or no. But there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. I think in a nutshell, there's this fascination with being right. I gotta be right. Right? I gotta be right. I think it's the two. One, you have to have an answer, just like you said. Have to have an answer. And two, I have to be right. And anybody who disagrees with me has to be wrong. And not only do they have to be wrong, they have to feel bad about being wrong.
Yep. It's okay to disagree on something that you can't factually prove that is wrong on like matters of opinion. You don't have to be right on matters of opinion. Like,
Right.
is Mayo better or is Miracle Whip better? Like, Mayo's better because X, Y, and Z. Miracle Whip's better because W, X, and T.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, studies show.
studies show that mayonnaise is better for you. Like, yeah, but Miracle Whip is better for the economy. And it's like, talking about sandwich bread, people.
Yeah. Just go with what you like.
Put what you want on your sandwich. You can enjoy your sandwich. You know what? I will buy a jar of both, and you can tell me which one you want on your sandwich, and we could cohabitate perfectly. And that's a very simple situation. But yeah, like, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to offer your evidence, and it's okay for someone to say, like, I see your evidence, and I think it's bunk. Like, you're right. Like, people want to be an answer. They want to be right. They want to win. They want to have that feather in the cap. Said, I'm going to chalk a W up in this corner, and this person has to take the L. And I am so much better than this person. Everybody look at me. I'm the best.
Yeah. But that doesn't have to be the case. It's okay to be wrong.
It's going to be wrong. It's okay to have some L's.
To say I don't know. It's okay not to know.
Yep.
All right, buddy. Well, you know what? There's one thing I want to address before we close out here, and that's your background. Where'd you get that background from?
I painted this.
That's
That
pretty
was me.
cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
And you're not, I think you said earlier, this isn't a second business or anything like that.
I get bored and I paint. It makes me feel better. I put it away. I haven't painted in a while because I felt pretty good.
I like what you got there. Is that supposed to be like a sunset, or did you just
I'll send you the whole picture. It's got I don't even know what it is, man. Like, I get a brain thing of like, yeah, this is what you want to paint. I'm like, all right, let's go. But
it's not a
picture. It's not nothing. It's just
you just put the colors together.
Just put the colors. That's cropped down because when I took the picture, you could see the outline and stuff. I'll send you the whole one if you want to look at it.
Nice. I like it.
It's got like a rolling hills thing on the bottom, and I guess the colors are pretty close to maybe a red sunset or something like that.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's cool, man. Good job.
Thank you.
I didn't prep you for this next question, but I always ask. I always ask my guests one question before we close out each episode, and I don't prep you because I'm looking for a genuine answer, something genuine. If there was one piece of advice, one piece of information, just whatever it is that you could share with anybody who might be listening, what would that one thing be?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself.
That's cool. Yeah, I like it. That's right. Love your neighbor.
That's what popped in my head first thing. There are lots of things I could tell you, but that's probably the most important.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, man. I appreciate you sharing that. Me being a person of a Christian faith, those are very prominent and important commandments straight from the man. Yep. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
No worries, man.
All right. So this has been This Way Out. Huge thanks to David Bennett for spending some time with me. If you liked this episode, you want to see future episodes, you know the drill. Click like, subscribe, click the bell. And I think there's like a notifications thing there. Like, you got to click all. Some people have been, giving me some feedback that when I put out new episodes, they don't get notifications. So when you click that little bell, make sure you've got all selected. The podcast form, well, this episode, as you're seeing it right now, is going to be available on YouTube. The podcast version will be available on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Castbox, iHeartRadio. So if you're listening to podcasts, you can find it on any one of those platforms, plus the This Way Out website, thiswoe-life.com. Don't forget that if you want to support This Way Out, you can buy yourself a t-shirt. Help me spread the focus on the good message. You can get that from reallydesigns.biz. That's a veteran-owned business. reallydesigns.biz. Plus, I've got Patreon. You can be a patron of This Way Out now. Isn't that cool? Only costs $2 a month. And you get to say hey. But once again, thank you again, David. I appreciate your time, buddy.